Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Metra AV Tech Tips. I am your host Adam Rogers and as you can tell, of course, again, I am sans Brent this week and in fact today is a recorded episode. So if you have any questions about whatever it is that I'm talking about today, leave it down in the comment section below and I will definitely come in and watch those comments and reply to them just as soon as they come in. In fact, I'm going to try to be there when this video is going live, so ask your questions away and I'll try and answer them as we come to them. I'm going to go ahead and dive basically right into what we're talking about today. And of course, we'll open it up with what we normally do. As always, like, share, subscribe, and hit that little bell notification button to let you know whenever we do go live, which of course is every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and now every Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time as well for our AV Tech Tips solutions. Like we say all the time, Wednesday is our episode where we talk about concepts and ideas for you, the installers and the integrators out there in the field, and whereas Friday is where we talk about a specific product that we sell that goes along with our Wednesday episode. So with that said, find us on other social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and a bunch of other ones as well, so you can find us there. And like I said before, if you have any questions about whatever it is that I'm talking about today, or if you have any comments or stories that you've run into that goes along with this, leave it down in the comment section below. And in fact, even if it has nothing to do with today's episode, we always love hearing from you, viewers out there in the field, and the integrators that are out there doing the work and stuff. So again, let's go ahead and dive right into whatever it is that we're talking about today. So find my little button here. We'll make this thing happen, see if I can do it the correct way for that. So today's topic is what audio format should you use? Because truthfully, there's a lot of different types of audio formats out there. You have things from stereo sound, you have mono, you have surround sound, you have 5.1, 7.1, you have object-based 3D surround, you have, anywhere from one speaker all the way up to now we have almost 100 speakers in some applications in like the high-end theaters, not even just home theaters, but movie theaters and whatnot, where we have so many different speakers in there. You have these massive arrays and whatnot. So what formats should you be using? Well, to make things really simple, whatever your source has is what you're going to be watching. That's basically what it comes down to. We can talk about this until the cows come home. We can talk about this, for a long time to decide what's the best one to use, what's the best one for the application of the room that you're in, what's the best one for viewing pleasure, what's the best one for seating arrangements, whatever it is. But the truth comes down to if your media content doesn't have that format, you're not going to be watching it. So with that said though, let's talk about the different types of formats and what they are. Now, what I've done is I've actually went ahead and made a nice little drawing here. Let's see if I can get this to work right. We'll do that and then we'll do this. So went ahead and drew something up beforehand. Of course, this is just a standard surround sound system layouts. Okay, so we've got our front stage up here. We have our left, center, and right. From there, we have our surround left and our surround right. Then we have our rear left and our rear right. We even have a rear center because we're going to be talking about that 6.1 system that came out a little while back. We have our subwoofer 1 or subwoofer 2 because you might have two outputs on your AVR. It just depends on what your AVR is capable of doing. We have our height speakers, our height front left, height front right, and our height rear left and our height rear right. Try to say all of this like 10 times fast. I stumbled over all of this so many times, but ours is what really throws me. The rear right, that's a fun one. So, but anyways, let's go ahead and look at what we have going on here. Now, really straightforward, we're going to start with just stereo sound. Well, in fact, we could even go back as far as to say what's mono sound. So of course, mono is just one speaker, right? You have one voice, one location. You have one mouth as a person. You're only speaking one thing. You can only make one sound at one time, unless you're one of those beatboxing people that they can make these amazing sounds. It makes it sound like there's like 4 different instruments. But anyways, all that to say, mono is just one speaker, right? You've got one microphone, one speaker, and that's what you've got. Now, unless you get into like some of the artsy movies that are being created and whatnot for a specific style, that's not really a thing for today's market or in today's world at all. But stereo or PCM, we'll write that down here for you to look up later on, is 2-channel. We've got left and right. So with two-channel audio, really straightforward. PCM is pulse, uh-oh, I forgot what that said. Pulse something modulated, or pulse something modulation. So, but essentially what this is where we are taking the signal, we're modulating it over the same connection, usually as what video is being traveled down. But essentially what it is it gives us the ability to have audio transmitted over a bunch of different mediums. You can have it stored directly onto the video medium that you're watching. You can have it put over Toslink, you can have it put over digital coax, you can have it put over HDMI, or you can have it just stored as a file as itself as PCM. Then you also have Lpcm. Now, Lpcm is where we start getting into more of the, actually that's the wrong one there, more of the surround sound functions for a system. With Lpcm, you can have surround sound, and that's usually one that's not compressed in any, well, pardon me, compressed is the wrong term for it. It's not encoded in any way other than just an open standard for Lpcm. Now, normally when you see Lpcm, it's still going to be just a left and a right channel, so you still have just stereo connections. So when we talk about different things, a lot of times we'll talk about, hey, you need to make sure that your source device is set to a PCM signal. That PCM signal is really just a stereo signal. It's the most basic of signals that we deal with in today when we're dealing with any type of sound systems out there. And so a lot of times, in order to make things work correctly, you may have to have them just in PCM or stereo connection. So a PCM stereo connection, again, like I said, is almost the most basic, other than mono, where we just have one speaker, but in most cases we're not dealing with that now. But PCM stereo is usually supported by almost everything. Very rarely are you going to have something that's not supported of PCM, and if it's not supported for PCM, usually that means it's just a straight analog signal where you already have the audio broken out over a left and right channel. And so with something like that, you don't really have to worry about it. But we are looking for PCM in a lot of cases because you may have something that doesn't have Dolby licensing or DTS licensing or something else. And a lot of guys have already run into this where if you have a device that doesn't have Dolby audio capabilities, you may be trying to break out audio on, say, like an audio breakout device of some kind. You plug it into the analog connections on the output, and all you get is some weird garbled sound. That's this happening. Basically, it's trying to get PCM stereo audio from that system, but it can't. And so because of that, what it winds up doing is it winds up giving you that encoded audio from Dolby or DTS again, where it's just encoded. And so you get this weird modulated sound, or not modulated, but this weird garbled sound coming out of the system, and it doesn't sound right. And you won't be able to listen to any of it because none of it's going to make sense. So you need to watch for that. So in a lot of cases, we'll say, okay, make sure that your source device is set to PCM or stereo sound. And so you want to make sure that that's set up. Something that runs into that a lot of times, we've actually talked about it in the past, is like our matrices. And so I actually have one over here. So our matrices do not have down mixing on the audio output portions of it. We have a digital output, but we also have an analog stereo output that does not have down mixing capabilities. So if you give it Dolby audio, you're going to get that garbled sound on that. So you want to watch out for that, make sure that you don't run into that problem. So from PCM stereo, we go into the encoded side of things. We go into more of the licensed side of things. So I'm going to switch back over to this here. Turn this back on. Okay, so now that we've talked about PCM stereo, now let's talk about Dolby Pro Logic. So the special thing about Pro Logic is this. When we have Dolby Pro Logic, type it out or write it out correctly. So Pro Logic is really just the technology of how we get a stereo signal, so a left and right channel signal, so there's our left and there's our right, and how do we turn that into a pseudo surround sound audio? And so what it does is it almost does like a PCM, where it modulates the signal down one channel. So for instance, our left channel will carry both our left and our center channel. And then our right channel will carry both the right and it's actually a summed rear. And so a lot of times what guys would do in the past is they would take this rear channel and they would just split it out between the rear left and rear right. And so they wouldn't have just a central speaker here in the middle. They would have the rear right and rear left. Now, the problem with the Pro Logic system is that the data was compressed. And so in a lot of times, you wouldn't have super low lows for a subwoofer, and you wouldn't have the high highs in order to get like a full image out of that audio. And so it would sound a little tinny, it would sound a little mids would be too strong in that. And so you would get kind of an odd sound. And for my eyes anyways, and Brent would make fun of me for this, but it makes me think of VCR and VHS, because the video portion of that was a really compressed version of the video. And so this reminds me of that. When you listen to the old Dolby Pro Logic systems, and a lot of times you would hear just a really compressed audio. You would be missing the highs and lows out of it. I'm not going to make a joke about a certain manufacturer because that fits too well. But that's Dolby Pro Logic. So the important thing about Pro Logic is this type of ability for it to take the right and left signals and modulate it to where we could have an additional channel out of one of the other channels. So you would have a left and a center, and then you would have a right and a rear. So you would have that ability to, you know, mix that out of that. So that's where Pro Logic comes in, and that's where, when you do some research, they call it matrixing, and that's basically what they're doing. They're just taking the data and they're matrixing it so that you can have the additional connections to it. So that's Dolby Pro Logic. Now let's get into some of the more traditional surround sound systems and what they were and how they started. So we'll go ahead and delete this here. Delete this. Listen to me, I almost sound like I've grown up around TVs all the time or something, or computers my entire life. Okay, so let's go to AC3. So AC3 was Dolby's first real step into something beside Dolby Pro Logic. So AC3 actually became Dolby Digital. And again, I may be wrong about this, guys. Please let me know down in the comments if I am. This is just me doing my own research on this, because I unfortunately grew up just after all of this was happening, and so I missed out on a lot of what's happening here with this. So if I missed something, if I describe it incorrectly, please let me know down in the comments. But we have Dolby Digital, but we also have, I think they said in around 1993 is when DTS also came into play. So in my research, and again, this is just from my own research, it's not actually from any particular things on it, but it looked like DTS actually had a little bit of a higher bit rate, so you'd wind up with a slightly better sound. Now, sound is very personal, and so some people may say that it was better, some people may say it was not as good, but that's entirely up for debate on that. So, but how does AC3 or Dolby Digital or DTS work? So, this is where we get into something that's an actual surround sound channeled system. So we don't have to worry about modulating the left over to the center and then the right to the rear or anything like that. Now we actually have discrete channels for that service. So what we wind up with Dolby Digital is a true 5.1, right? 5.1. So we had our left, we had our center, our rear, we had our surround left and our surround right, and then we had our subwoofer. And so all these connections came back to the central processor, like so. So with a 5.1 system, we had true surround sound. We had an Lfe output for the subwoofer. And Lfe, of course, is the low field energy or something like that. But basically what it is it's just dedicated to the subwoofer. I didn't write down what Lfe stands for. I should have. However, it's basically just a low pass filter on this to make sure that the subwoofer, or high pass, pardon me, a high pass filter. Brent, if Brent was here, he'd be making fun of me, I know it. But essentially what it does is it separates out just the sound for the subwoofer. So and in the newer systems, or even back then, you were able to actually tweak that and tune specific frequencies to go to the subwoofer only. And so that's where your Lfe came in. So with these connections then, now we have a true surround sound system. That means that when the producers and the sound engineers were actually engineering the videos for this, they were able to say, here's the left channel, here's the right channel, and here's the center channel, here's the surround left and the surround right. And so they could say, okay, we want the dinosaur to start back here on the surround right, and we want it to walk over the center, which means we're going to start bringing in these other ones, and we want it to walk out the left, so it's walking over top of your head. And that was a really cool thing that created some amazing capabilities with this system. And this was actually an uncompressed system, so we had the full range of audio, whereas with the Pro Logic, we had to compress that data because we had to make room for an additional channel to fit inside that same space. But now we were able to have full audio capabilities for this system. And that's where the AC3, Dolby Digital, and DTS came in. So 5.1 to this day is still the standard for surround sound. Very quickly, the 3D environment or the 3D audio is beginning to take over. However, for now, this is still the standard that everyone is dealing with until Dolby Atmos and DTS X step in and overthrow that. But it's an amazing system. In surround sound, you really only need this many speakers in order for it to work correctly. You technically only needed the front stage and one rear in order for this to work in a decent fashion. I would still say you need the left and right rears or the surrounds, because this would allow you to have like a directional service sound stage in the rear, so you would know where something is coming from and where it's going, not just, okay, it's stepping in from the right and then going straight back. You wouldn't have anything like that. So that's AC3, that's Dolby Digital, DTS, and DTS. From there, we get into the DVD era. So actually, technically, the 5.1 was still in the VCR era, if I understood correctly. Now, 5.1 and 6.1 were really close together on this. And I may have said that incorrectly about the DVD and the VCR, but now we have 6.1 systems. And this is where Dolby EX comes into play. Right? So we've got our Dolby EX. They also called it Surround X from Dolby. Surround X. And then, of course, you had DTS ES, was their version of it as well. But theirs was a little bit different. Theirs was actually a discrete versus a matrixed version or a modulated version, right? So you had, for DTS, it was actually a little bit different. Let's start with Dolby and we'll talk about that and we'll make our way to DTS. With Dolby EX and the Surround EX, you actually wound up with a total of 6.1 channels. So you had 6.1. So not only did we have our front stage left, center, rear, but we also had our surround left and our surround right. But we also, with 6.1, we included a rear center. And so with this rear center connection, you now had an additional stage or an additional direction for your surround sound. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, this is the more speakers and the more directionality, the finer the movement with these speakers, I feel is better. Now, you may run into an issue where the sound begins to get a little muddy, but that's where systems like the Odyssey step in, where they can do distance measurements of those speakers, so you know exactly how far away they are, so you get a little bit of a less odd sounding or time delays out of it, so you don't get like a muddy or reverberating sound. But that's where that comes in. So Dolby EX, or they're calling it Surround EX as well, and then DTS ES did the same thing. So the DTS ES did the 6.1. However, their discrete is just like the Dolby EX and the Surround EX, because the Dolby EX and the Surround EX was discrete. You actually had discrete channels for all of them. And Dolby ES discrete was the same way. So you had a discrete left channel, center, and right, surround left, surround right, and rear center. But now with the with the DTS ES matrix, instead what you have is a matrix setup like we talked about with the Dolby Pro Logic. So you would wind up having something like the left, center, right, surround left, and surround right, but then what they would do is they would sum the surround speakers to create your rear center channel. And so you actually sum that together. And so this connection here was kind of faked. It was kind of misleading on that. Now, from my research, it wasn't so much that this was a weird or faked connection. Instead, what this was more of a if you only had 6 speakers, but you were only getting 5.1 audio, then your AVR or your processor would do the work of summing these connections together to give you that 6th channel in the rear. So there very rarely would you actually get something that was produced without that as a matrix system. So that's the Dolby EX, Surround EX, and DTS ES direct discrete or matrix system. So let's talk about the next thing. Now we get into 7.1. So with 7.1, and again, you all can go online and do your own research on this. I did the same thing that you would do if you were in that case. Or if you lived this, let me know down in the comments, because I really want to hear it from somebody who's actually gone through this. And of course, I'm going to be talking to Brent about it when he gets back. But essentially, this is what I've found. So the next thing that come in is actually where we get into problems with space. We run out of data. We run out of storage. That's kind of one of the big problems. So the next thing in line is Dolby Digital, and there's Dolby again. They're kind of obviously they're the leaders in this. So we had Dolby Digital Plus, right? That's kind of the big one. That's the big one that, or pardon me, that's pretty close to the big one, right? Now the difference between Dolby Digital Plus and Dolby True HD, because this is about the same time, and again, you can correct me in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Dolby Digital Plus and Dolby True HD are essentially the same thing. They are 7.1 systems. So that means we've got our center channel, our left, our right for the front stage. We have our surround left and our surround right for the surround stage. And then now we have discrete rear left and rear right channels. And then of course the 7.1, meaning we've got the subwoofer, right? So Dolby Digital Plus and Dolby True HD, the difference though is the amount of data that they take up for storage. So Dolby Digital Plus was what's known as a lossy service or a lossy data. And what that means though is that we are actually losing data by using the lossy connection. And with that lossy connection, what we run into is that we are compressing the data for that. So you would lose some highs, you lose some lows, or what we have to do is we have to compress the data, so rip out some of the data and compress it to take up less space, and then we have to recreate it elsewhere, which means that there could be errors. We could get the wrong data that's put in there. It's still done really well. You would probably be hard pressed to hear the difference between them, because Dolby True HD is a lossless connection or lossless audio format. So with the lossy versus the lossless audio formats, the biggest difference is the amount of space that they take up for storage on the medium that they are using. Pardon the background announcement. That's the only difference between the two of those. They are still a 7.1 service. Now we've got this subwoofer too. Let's talk about that, because you could have 5.1 or 5.2. You could have 6.1 or 6.2, or you could have 7.1 or 7.2. So what's this subwoofer doing? Well, it's doing the same exact thing that Subwoofer 1 is doing in most cases. You do have some processors and AVRs that have timing capabilities where they can, if they're in different locations of the room, they can do timing to make sure that the sound from each one hits that primary spot of the room correctly with the correct timing. But in most cases, it's just a secondary output from the primary one on that system. And again, a lot of them have the ability to time correct it, but they also have the ability to volume correct it as well. So if one is more powerful than the other, one can be a little bit louder than the second one, or vice versa, however that works. So in this 7.1 system, you also have something from DTS. So DTS, they had DTS HD. So DTS HD, that was a lossy system, just like a Dolby Digital Plus. And then you've got DTS Master. Which that one was a lossless audio format. And that was the only difference between all of them, was one was lossy and one was lossless. Only difference between DTS and Dolby Digital is who made it. I don't know if there's any major difference in bit rate between DTS and Dolby Digital at this stage, because in most cases they're probably using the same amount of storage for everything. But if you know better on that, please let me know down in the comments below. I'm really curious to see if there's anything actually that's different on it. So that's 7.1. Now, we're already stepping into a difference in the type of systems that people have nowadays. Now, most people are still going to have that 5.1 system inside their house. And in most cases, they don't even have that. In most cases, they have something like a 3.1 system inside their house. So because of that, the 7.1 is now already an upgrade from what they have currently. So how do we combat that? How do we make sure that we do something like that? Because in most cases, you are actually still getting on DVDs and Blu-rays a 5.1 signal in a lot of cases, because 7.1 still isn't the primary, it still isn't the thing that they put on there for that. So they may do Dolby Digital Plus, but it may still be mixed as a 5.1 signal instead of a 7.1. They're just not using the additional ones. Well, that's where we bring in the different modulated systems that are built into your AVR. Or pardon me, the mixing systems that are built into your AVR. So what you want to look for is the type of capabilities that your AVR has. Now, in most cases, most AVRs have all of this already, or some kind of equivalent of this in their system. So let's say, for instance, you're given a 5.1 audio source, and you have a 6.1 or even a 7.1 system. So you're being given 5.1. So we've got this, 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 and this. So that's what we're being given. Well, if you use Dolby's Pro Logic 2X, so Pro Logic 2, Roman numerals, X, what that's going to do is that's going to take the signal that's being sent out through all of this, and it's going to convert it to whatever you have. So say, for instance, you have a 6.1 system, you've got this rear channel. Well, it's going to take this left and right service, and it's going to sum it together, and it's going to give you your rear center. Just like we talked about before, where you had the Dolby EX and the DTS ES system. If you had some kind of upgrade service like the Pro Logic 2X, it would take that and actually upgrade it to something else. So we're given that 5.1. So let's say, for instance, we're given, instead of 5.1, we're given a 7.1 surround sound audio. So we're given something like Dolby Digital or Dolby True HD. With that, we're using, instead of Dolby Pro Logic 2X, we're using 2Z. Okay? So with Pro Logic 2Z, we're given a 7.1 audio, and we're going to convert it into 9.1 or higher, right? So that's where these height channels come into play. So the height channels, the way that they work is that they're basically taking the left and right channels for the front, and the left and right channels for the surround sound, and maybe they're the right and right and left rear channels. And again, they're doing kind of a summing capabilities for it, but they're doing a little bit more than that. So there's something that they're calling height sound cues. I'll write this down for you to look it up. So height sound cues. Okay, look that up, because this is really interesting. And actually, if I remember correctly, I think Bose was actually one of the first ones to do this. I'm probably wrong about that, but I remember seeing the advertisement for it, and it was one of the first ones that I'd seen. So maybe they're just better at advertising. So with height sound cues, here's the way that that works. Now, most of us here on Earth, we have 2 ears. Most animals here on Earth also have 2 ears. So how do we know that something is coming up at us from behind or above? Well, the shape of your ear, and this is actually, I'm not going to zoom in on my ear or anything like that, but the shape of your ear affects the way that sound enters your ear. It actually changes the sound. And so what happens is, essentially, if you're facing something head on, your ear captures the sound and funnels it into your ear canals and then into your eardrums. But instead, If you have something coming at you from behind, it's having to pass through the back of your earlobe and then enter the channel and go into your ears. That's affecting the sound. It actually makes it sound different to your ears. So when you were very small, an infant, your brain was processing that information. It was learning that the sound was coming from behind. You would have a parent or somebody that would say something from behind you, and you may look over there thinking that they're coming from over there because they may be coming from over there. But over time, your brain started picking up that, oh, okay, that sound meant that it's coming from behind me. So that sound is recreatable. We can actually filter an audio sound, or an audio signal coming through a system, and we can filter that sound to make it sound like it's coming from behind. That's where these height sound cues come into play, because they're height speakers. We're filtering that sound that's coming from the left and the right channels and making it sound like it's coming from above, because we're actually changing the way that the ears hear that sound. Even though they're coming from straight ahead, that makes it sound like they're coming from above because it's filtering it to make it sound like that. So when you look at Pro Logic 2Z, we'll switch back over here to this. When you look at the Pro Logic 2Z, the way that it's working is essentially it's taking the right and left signals and it's running it through that process to make it sound like it's coming from slightly above. And that's where those come in. So that's a 9.1 signal, but you can also do the same thing for the rear heights and the on both sides. But it's doing just a little bit more. It's actually taking from these here, so it actually winds up having a little bit more data. And so you get a slightly better sound sometimes, at least in my ears anyways. And so that's where you get those rears for that. It's actually taking this signal, running it through a filter to make it sound different. It's basically just an equalizer. It's just running it through an equalizer curve, and it's spitting it out in this connection here, this amplified output here. And then it's running it through that speaker. So now it sounds like that audio is coming from above instead. And that's essentially what the Pro Logic 2Z is doing to give you those height channels if you don't have a discrete height channel. And that's where those are. So from there, we also have some Odyssey DSX or DSX2. That's essentially doing the same thing, but it's giving you the ability to go all the way up to an 11.1 channel, which means you have additional 2 speakers here. So we're not going to get into that one today, but I did write that down, so you can go look that up. Odyssey is the same company that does the Odyssey sound correction or timing correction stuff. They decided to step in and start trying their own hand at it, but they kind of stepped in a little late, because now we step into today, because today is where we get into the really, really fun stuff. Now we get into Dolby Atmos. If you have not heard about Dolby Atmos, are you living under a rock? If you're in this industry and you have not heard about Dolby Atmos, or better yet, if you are in this industry and you have not listened to Dolby Atmos, a good Dolby Atmos system, do yourself a favor, schedule a time to find a local movie theater that actually has Dolby Atmos in there. You can actually go to the Dolby website and look at Atmos, and I believe, or at least they used to anyways, you can find local Atmos theaters where you can go and experience this, or you can find demo rooms where you can actually listen to this. I know if you go to like CES or CEDIA, a lot of times the different speaker manufacturers or amplifier manufacturers will have demo rooms where you can experience this stuff. Seriously, do yourself a favor, go and experience it. It's amazing. So the Dolby Atmos, the way that it works is it's now, instead of having to sum or run these height speakers through a filter, instead what it's doing is it's giving it discrete audio channels. Now, it's a little bit more than that. So Dolby Atmos traditionally has a minimum of a 5.1.2 speaker layout, right? Traditionally. Now, nowadays you actually have the 2-channel Dolby Atmos, which does that same thing, the height sound cue system, where it's tricking your ears into thinking that the audio is coming from a height location. You find that a lot in like sound bars or in headphones. So that's still something that does happen. However, it's not as often anymore, or it's not as discrete as a true Dolby Atmos system. Now, Dolby Atmos is actually expandable. You can expand it to well beyond this. So you can have a 7.1 or 0.2 system with 4 speakers in the ceiling. And these are height speakers. These are speakers in the ceiling. These are all discrete channels for that. I don't know if it does the rear center. That would be kind of interesting. I'm kind of curious if it does or not. I don't believe it does, but it might. You'll have to find out for sure. So that's essentially how Dolby Atmos is doing it. Now, it's not discrete channels. So here's the thing. Well, it is discrete channels, but it's not mixed in a traditional surround sound sense. So traditionally, what you would have is you would have somebody or a sound engineer sitting at a booth, and they're running, you know, the different channels and stuff. They're saying, okay, here's, again, we have a plane flying back here to forward, and so we're going to start in the surround left speaker. We're going to increase that audio there. Then as it starts flying overhead, we're going to lower it here, increase it there, and then it's going to fly overhead. It's going to go over there. Now, traditionally, that's how it's done, because we're just going in and changing the volume, essentially, is what's happening, of the audio as it flies from channel to channel. We're just moving it from channel to channel, and we're doing that in a very analog way. We're just telling it where it's at by physically moving basically counters on that, or different volume switches, or volume sliders. I know I'm dumbing it down, but it's a lot more advanced than that, and I don't have the training on that because I'm not someone who's an audio engineer. I would love to see that in person, and if you are doing that, or if you know anybody that's doing that, please get them in touch with me. I would love to hear from them, and I would love to have an opportunity to see them in action. 386-492-8584 is our tech support line. That will get to me also. So, what's actually happening? Well, imagine this. Imagine you have a box. Let me look and see if I've got a good sized box for this. Okay, we'll use one of our Spyclops boxes here. Let's pretend that this is your room. When I'm holding the room, right? This is your theater. You're sitting somewhere center of that box, inside of that box. Now, what's happening digitally is the sound object, so the helicopter sound, is an object in a 3D environment. So a lot of this comes down to, if you play any kind of video games, when you see something moving around in a video game, that's an object in that video game. Essentially what's happening is the same thing, but they're putting, instead of a visual object there, they're putting an audio object in that same location. They're moving it around. So what you can do is you can have this box, and you're moving the audio inside that 3D environment. So now the audio engineers, when they're creating these systems, they're not mixing boarding it, although that's maybe where they're starting to get the correct sound profiles for it. But then when they create the 3D environment for the surround sound, they're actually manually moving this stuff, or in a lot of cases, they're just keyframing it inside of this 3D environment. And so they're moving it forward, moving it back, side to side, but they're also moving it up and down. There was a Dolby Atmos demo that had a hummingbird flying around and a helicopter flying around. And the helicopter one's pretty good, but the hummingbird, that's the fun one, because there's actually a maple seed that pops off of something and it kind of flies around your head. You can hear it flying from above around your head and down as it circles around. Amazing demo for it. If you can find it, go and watch it. As crazy as it is, I think the Magnolia at Best Buy had that demo set up. Now that was here local to Central Florida here, but that was quite a while ago. But track that one down. That one's pretty good. So when inside that 3D environment is what's happening. They're actually moving that sound object inside this 3D environment. So you're saying to yourself, okay, well that's all well and good, but that's not my theater. That's not the project that I'm working on. That's not that, mine's actually not even that shape. Mine's, a square. Mine's bigger than that sideways rather than forwards. It actually looks like this. Well, that's okay, because that's where your, like the Odyssey sound microphones, where they calibrate it, that's where those come into play, because the distance is what really is important for that. If we know the distance from this vantage point here, we'll say that's our primary viewing location. If we know the distance from here to that speaker, to that speaker, to that speaker, we have a pretty good idea of where it's located in the room, because in most cases, most everything is placed in the correct spots or in the same general idea. So long as we are checking the distance to each one of these, we're actually getting a pretty good idea of where everything is at. And so we can recreate that 3D world inside of your environment. I say we. The Dolby Atmos system can actually recreate that 3D world inside of your environment with that instead. It's amazing the way that it works. So Dolby Atmos isn't the only one that's doing this. In fact, you actually have DTS that's doing the same thing. They call theirs DTS-X instead. There's one other, there's Oro 3D is the third one that's out there as well. At the very beginning, they were kind of a European country product, and so you weren't really seeing a whole lot of it here in the States. I think the research that I did had Marantz and Denon doing a lot with that to bring it here to the States. The difference with their system, though, is that they don't have only these surround in-ceiling speakers here. They have an additional one dead center that they actually call the voice of God. It's just a central speaker dead center over that. So this is the voice of God, I think is what they call it. But that central speaker gives you increased height dynamics in that system. And so because you have a dead center here, what it's able to do is if anything is perfectly above the viewing location, it's only in that speaker, which makes it feel like it's 100 stories tall or very, very high up there. And so you get some really dynamic surround capabilities and height values with that type of system. I haven't experienced the Oro 3D yet myself. I would love to at some point to see what it sounds like compared to a Dolby Atmos system. But again, with all of this, you need to make sure that the source material actually has this capability of watching this service or listening to this type of signal. There we go. If I hit the right button on that. So that's the different surround sound types and the different audio types out there. Which one should you be using? Now, again, like I said at the beginning, that really comes down to what it is you're doing. Because if your application only has the 5 surround speakers and the 1 subwoofer, in that case, 5.1 is as good as it's going to get unless you run additional speakers. Dolby Atmos does have that capability where you have the speakers that sit on top and bounce off the ceiling. Those are pretty good, but if your ceiling's not designed for that, you can actually muddy up the sound a little bit more. It does pretty good to combat that with the distancing problems. So that may be something that's a possibility for you in that case. So, but again, if you're limited to that, you're still not limited to that only, because again, with the Dolby Atmos or the DTS-X, DTS is actually calling theirs DTS Virtual X, and then Dolby Atmos Height Virtualization is what Dolby Atmos is calling theirs, where if you don't have enough speakers to do that, so you have a 3.1 or stereo sound, they'll actually take the sound and actually make it sound like that's that height sound cue to give you more of a spatial setting that you're listening to. So those are still possible. So if you have a 5.1 system, you can still use Dolby Atmos in that application. What it's going to do is it's going to try to mimic or recreate that sound through the virtualizing of that height channel to make it sound like it could be coming out from higher because it's running it through that filter. So that's kind of what it comes down to for that. Now, again, if you're listening to the audio from the built-in speakers, or if you have a sound bar, in a lot of cases, again, you're still limited to a 2-channel or a 3.1 or a 2.1 if you have like a wireless subwoofer. And in those cases, again, stereo audio is probably perfectly fine, and in fact may sound better than anything else. The Dolby Atmos and the DTS-X may be still a good use case for that, because that's actually going to help a lot of the vocals come out. A lot of people complain about the fact that the action is super loud, but the vocals are super quiet, or we can't hear what they're saying, or whatever it is. If you use a Dolby Atmos or DTS-X system, and even in the 2-channel, a lot of times that's known to bring out the vocals a little bit better and kind of minimize the action scenes from being too loud with that. So, but that's basically it. There's not a whole lot to get into with a system like this. You really want to dive in, reach out to your reps when it comes to Dolby or DTS or anything like that. Denon and Marantz have a fantastic team of reps, and for tech support, Yamaha, Onkyo, and the others, they also have amazing teams with that. If you are a dealer for them or an integrator for them, reach out to them. They have plenty of trainings. Dolby themselves has different training services that they put out there. In fact, I think Cedia actually puts on some of their trainings as well. Definitely reach out to them about that. Get some training on this stuff and find out about how to make these systems sound better. It's also going to help you make smaller systems sound even better than they could before. So reach out to them and find out more about that. So With that said, though, I think that kind of brings us to the end of today's episode. If you all have any other questions, please feel free to leave it down in the comment section below. I really appreciate hearing from you. Hopefully next week, I will no longer be Sans Brent. Brent will be back, hopefully. And next week, I know we said it would be this week, but that's what this video is. But next week, we should be doing that on-site thing with the truck show. We're finally doing it. We had to push it back a week, unfortunately. But next week, we should be over there to do that. I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a really great show. One of our local dealers here allowed us to go into their garage and look at their trucks and find out what should be on a truck. And I'm looking for you to tell me what you have on the truck that is a kind of a mandatory item that, one, is mandatory that everyone should have, and everyone should already know, but also I want to hear about the weird ones. What's a weird thing that you have on all of your trucks, no matter what? That way you can make sure that you never have a problem. Let me know down in the comments. You can, of course, reach out to us here on our tech support line. 386-492-8584 is our tech support line directly into our tech support. As always, I'm Adam. Don't forget, reboot early. Reboot often. Don't cut your wires too short. Oh, it's not working. Is our battery dead? Ah, there it goes. Reboot early, reboot often, don't cut your wires too short, turn off CEC, and call tech support. We'll see y'all later. Thanks, everyone.